The classic organization of the prison. One of the first reforms instituted by the sisters was to divide the prison into two sections. The first section, the section judiciaire, was the prison d'arrêt et de correction. This was reserved for prisoners awaiting trial, les prévenus, and for convicts whose sentences were for less than a year, les jugés. Some longer-term convicts with special skills also served their sentences residing in this section while staffing the central bakery, laundry, and magasin général located at the prison that served all of the prisons of the Department of the Seine. The first section also had three large cells, number 12, number 13, and number 14, reserved de la pistole. These were available to be rented at a high price, 7.5 francs per month, paid in advance. This section was reserved for elite prisoners who were awaiting trial for a first offense that was not a morals charge, and who had been pre-approved by a judge and the prison director to enjoy this privilege. These prisoners, who typically lived 2 or 3 to a cell, were largely exempt from following the regular prison routine, were attended to by a staff of 4 maids, and could arrange for their meals to be catered. There was also a quarter called la maternité for prisoners and convicts who were pregnant, or who had children under 3 years of age. Another dedicated quarter, une maison d'éducation correctionnelle, was called la Menagerie. It housed minor girls who had been convicted of crimes, been committed by their families for delinquency under the terms of the French Penal Code, or been arrested for prostitution. The girls attended classes, were taught catechism, and given vocational training while they were being held. The second section, la section administrative of the prison, housed prostitutes. Numbers of these women were arrested nightly for clandestine prostitution by the vice squad in sweeps through their well-known neighborhoods and haunts. These women, les mutinées et les gens, were then held by administrative fiat for anywhere from 3 days to 2 months at Saint-Lazare. The section also acted as a hospice and received elderly former prostitutes, les vieilles, who had nowhere else to live out their final days. In 1835, there was a special infirmary wing, la blanchisserie, added to this section, which was designed to receive up to 360 women in treatment for syphilis. Upon their arrest, unregistered prostitutes were tested for venereal diseases. Registered prostitutes from all over the city were required to come to the infirmary for regular checkups. If any were found to be infected, they were immediately hospitalized and treated. They could not be released until they were disease-free. The infirmary saw and treated thousands of patients a year. At times, the facility seems to have been overcrowded and grossly understaffed by second-rate doctors whose gynecological examination practices were alleged to be unsanitary and dangerous. However, after reforms instituted in 1888, the infirmary became an internationally respected research and treatment center for venereal diseases. The complex also had a number of solitary confinement cells reserved to punish the most troublesome prisoners. All infractions of the rules were reported by the sœur surveillante to their mother superior, who in turn reported them to the prison director, who then meted out the appropriate punishment. There were 4 levels of punishments prescribed for serious violations of prison rules: le séquestre, la cellule, le pain sec, and le cachot. The solitary confinement cells, le cachot, were tiny, poorly lit, vermin-infested, with only a naked plank for a bed. They were stifling in summer and freezing in winter. The prisoners were sometimes so frightened of this punishment that they refused to go to le cachot voluntarily, and had to be forcibly placed there by the handful of male guardians who were reserved for this work. These guards were also available to quell the fights or other disturbances that arose frequently enough within the prison. The prisoners from the various sections and quarters of the prison shared the use of 7 workrooms, the chapel, and refectory. The separation of the groups of prisoners was kept as strictly as possible. Moreover, there was also a strong sense of antagonism between the 2 main types of prisoners. One commentator noted, quote, "The debauched women, the prostitutes, have a certain pretension to probity. They rarely refer to their own sad condition, but they are quick to speak with scorn about the women who have been arrested for criminal offenses. These other women, who 9 times out of 10 are thieves and perpetrators of other vicious crimes, love to put on a virtuous air as they speak of the other prisoners, the prostitutes, with scorn." Unquote. The complete separation of the various classes of prisoners was always difficult, if not impossible, to enforce in practice, and caused problems in maintaining prison discipline and effective rehabilitation efforts. As one commentator noted, quote, "Despite all the divisions and subdivisions, the greatest promiscuity reigned at Saint-Lazare," unquote. Prison reformers believed that contacts with hardened convicts and prostitutes had a harmful effect on younger prisoners who still had the potential of being rehabilitated. As another commentator noted, quote, "Despite precautions, dangerous conversations between prisoners are inevitable, particularly in the workrooms. The prisoner sitting next to you is likely to be someone who has been arrested numerous times. Such a prisoner plays the role of a devil's advocate, giving bad example to the other prisoners by her words and actions. These prisoners are then put en garde and become possessed by a spirit of revolt and disobedience. This influence destroys any positive effects of exhortations to reform," unquote. These activists also felt that having the prisoners sleep together in large dormitories instead of individual cells, quote, "presented dangers that were easy enough to understand. In these places, perverted morals were everywhere to be seen, giving examples and lessons of immorality," unquote. According to the doctrinaire, the core problem of Saint-Lazare was the mélange singulier of hardened convicts, minors, first-time offenders, prisoners awaiting trial, and prostitutes. Contemporary opinion in prison reform circles focused on the danger d'agglomération of up to 1,500 such women at Saint-Lazare. The solution for reformers was clear. They advocated a separation of the various types of Saint-Lazare's prisoners into new, specialized prisons. The influence of these opinions led in June of 1875 to the passage of a law whose provisions now required that prisoners would be housed in individual cells, kept separate from each other day and night, with all communication between prisoners forbidden, the so-called régime cellulaire. As required by the new law, a detailed plan to apply the provisions to the entire French penal system were drawn up in the so-called Programme of 1877. As always, however, legislating reforms was one thing, implementing them was quite another.